Good day to you from Analytic on this Saturday, the 18th day of July in 2026. We have been endeavoring to talk about religion and science. Is there any overlap? I'm certain that you're aware that there is, but where do they overlap? What we are trying to do as humans, as individuals, is discover our origins, because unless you know where you're from, which entails knowing where humanity is from, then you don't know anything of value. Because what you're trying to do in life is orient your life. You're orienting your life toward death, which is traumatic. And that's what we covered yesterday in the endearing story, as I've reviewed this, the story of how I encountered the death of my best friend, which was a dog, which was older than I was. I was 6, the dog was about 18, and it was my friend, and I had never encountered death, and the dog died, and it was traumatic, and I'm still traumatized by the death of that dog. And you probably have some similar story. Maybe one of your family members died. That did not occur until well after the dog's death. And so that's what we're doing in life. That is the meaning of reality. The only meaning. There's no other problem. You have to solve that. So there are two related problems. And this has to do with teleology, which is a means of orientation on a timeline. We exist on a timeline. We emerged from unconscious state. In other words, you don't remember when the sperm and the egg conjoined, so don't give me your nonsense. I don't care what you say that's psychological, because you can't prove a goddamn thing you're saying. And I'm not sure anybody has ever seriously extrapolated that way. Well, how do you know that you don't remember from before the sperm and the egg conjoined? Well, I'll tell you why. Because that's unscientific. It violates rational logic, and you can't do that. So we're stuck with the problem the way I stated. Now, Al-Ghazali begins his tremendous book, The Revival of Religious Science, in exactly the same mode. He begins by saying, he's a religious man, so he begins by, praising his creator, because that's what he's going to be talking about. I don't start that way, but I do start in exactly the same mode as he did, because he starts out with a few paragraphs, which we'll be reading eventually, but I want to give you the context of my work in teleology to answer the only question that science has for a human, which is about birth and death. Birth and death. Now, birth refers to going backwards in time, of course, and death is still in the future for all my listeners and myself. But it's inevitable, and that's absolutely traumatic. That's absolutely traumatic. As the great Larry King, the great interviewer from he goes all the way back to the 20th century, which is now 26 years ago, and Larry King was interviewing a great comedian by the name of Norman Macdonald, who was known at that moment to be a Christian, which is very unusual for an entertainer. A comedian who's a Christian. So Larry King thought his audience might like to, know something about the Christian comedian. And it turned out that they were simpatico, that Larry King really liked Norman Macdonald. And so the question was actually going back and forth. And Norman counter-asked Larry, do you fear death? And why? Why do you fear death? And Larry really gave this some serious thought, which for an interview host is most unusual, because now there's a lull while he's thinking. It was amazing. And I'll give a link to that if you'd like to see it. It's out on YouTube. This interview where Larry, he's really, what is it? And he said, well, it's oblivion. It's oblivion. And, he knew that wasn't enough. He went on, oblivion. Basically what he was saying was cessation of consciousness. That just freaked him out. Well, everybody has their own way of saying that, but that's the problem. is that you can't imagine it. The cessation of consciousness, that raises an existential question. Then how come I'm conscious now? That's the question. That's the only question. It has nothing to do with quantum mechanics directly. It has nothing to do with telescopes looking to the edge of the universe directly. It has to do with you. Speaking for myself and you and any other rational man. You only have one question that has to be answered. Everything else is at a completely different, inferior level. Maybe you're interested in why the sun flies through the sky. Sure. Why not? What else are you going to do? You got to learn something. So you're growing. So you come out of a state of absolute unconsciousness. I don't think people talk about this enough. When facing the conundrum of death, the absolutely leveling experience of the apperception of cessation of consciousness, it's unthinkable. It's unimaginable. It's irrational. And it is, and I can prove that. No, your consciousness will not cease. Because if it did, Hitler gets away with murdering millions of people. No, he's not unconscious ultimately. And that goes for Netanyahu and Trump and everyone else you hate that you know is psychotic. Jack the Ripper, Al Capone. For fuck's sake, there's millions of murderers in this fucking world. What, they get to just go to sleep forever like Bam the dog? No, they don't. Or nothing makes sense. Which I think is the ultimate conclusion of a misguided, rational Western science. Is they state when they talk about biology or geology or anything else, they just say it's a cuckoo clock universe, it has no meaning whatsoever. Well, I'm sorry, you're wrong. You're not thinking clearly. You're not thinking at all. You have a rational consciousness, you have to account for that, or you're not a man. You're not a truth teller. You're not a guide, you're not a leader, you're not rational, you're not even human. And that's how our Western science projects itself. Where do men come from? Monkeys. Really? When? Oh, millions of years. Well, how did this Earth get here, this perfect ecology? Same answer. No meaning. Absolutely none. And that's the conclusion of Western rational science. That's not an answer. That's absolutely dodging the issue. It's just about dawn here. It's the wee hours of the morning, the early hours, and we have a train coming through, which comes through about 20 times a night here in Chico, California, and blares about a 200 decibel horn. And nobody can change this law, that it has to do that, otherwise it'll run over some fucking drunken students. That's the logic. So the entire town gets blasted 20 times a night with that train horn. And that's the law, and nobody can change it because this is not a free nation. Nobody has any control over what the government does. It just does whatever the fuck it wants. And so we get to hear that goddamn horn. Pardon me, but I just woke up. All right, so what we're trying to do is answer the only question that rational science has for a rational man, which has to do with teleology. Teleology simply means beginning and end. Now, if you're going forward, that's called eschatology, which has to do with purpose, or at least conclusion, climax. Where are we going? Either as individuals, as humanity, or as a planet. What's happening? Where's it going? What do you see in the future? A little hard to absolutely determine the future, but if you think linearly, you can extrapolate from trends where we're going. Now, going back in time, that has a different word. It's not eschatology, it's simply origins. The origin, which has to do not with purpose, not with climax, but with inception, which has to do with cause. So it's cause and purpose. That's teleology. So it's dualistic. And that's correct. If you're not addressing your question as a dualism, You're not seeing correctly. I discovered that. That's my discovery. It was virtually known, but never turned into a law of the universe, a law of logic. That if you want to, for instance, discuss what is the atom, you can't. It's just an atom. You can't get anywhere because you're just going to be talking about the characteristics of a thing. That's totally linear. You can't do that because there's no such thing as linear logic except as a derivative of actual logic that the universe uses. That is my discovery, which I call synthetic idealism. It's one of the principles of synthetic idealism. So we're going to go through this sequence so you know how I developed this absolute framework for reality that gets all the answers, which is what science wanted. So that you have an absolute proof sequence for the existence of God. God is the decider. And I don't mean that in the sense that God is the ultimate judge. That's a characteristic that you can apply to the concept of God. But to prove the existence of supernatural, superconscious, superintelligent, superhuman reality, which is the only rational conclusion that you reach from induction, is in order for there to even be science, in order for there to be anything you can name, it had to come from somewhere. And since it can be proved using strict logic that there is a very complex design called the ecology, it goes much further, it goes to everything, but it is balanced, it is rational, it can be studied, and conclusions can be drawn that are absolutely true without invoking Deus Ex Machina. In other words, you just invent a God because you need to lie. And you're no longer using rational logic. You introduce God because you say so. And then you point to the Bible, or you point to some man like Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad. I'm sorry, you can't do that. So Western science at least has that going for it. You cannot begin with the Bible. You cannot do that. Yes, you can, but you're not using the most efficient method of deciding the issue, which is what? Essentially, you can put it into several frameworks, but the right way, and I'm just saying because this is my job, was to figure this out. I've been doing this all my life. What is the right way to begin to address the problems we have that must be answered? It's not optional. We're not talking about quantum mechanics, whether it's the many worlds theory or something else. We're not dealing with reality at these little tiny angels on a pinhead sort of discussions. It enters into the whole picture, obviously. But now you're swamped. You have nowhere to begin. You're disoriented. And you have to orient first. You must do that. And nobody's been able to do that. Nobody's ever been able to orient correctly. Either you decide on the Bible or some other bullshit source, or you start with the universe. And in science, you have to start with the universe. Physics. Physics. Because God, whatever God is, he does not violate physics. Now, both in Islam and in Christianity, it is just, that is not the case. They start out by saying, you don't need logic. You need a creator, and then you just assign to the creator whatever you need to assign in order to get your orientation from God, which you invented. And you can't prove the existence of God because you've axiomatized God to kickstart your orientation system. And so you're wrong. You start out by saying, I can't be right, so I'm going to be wrong, and let's see if we can get rational answers out of an absolutely false start. You can't do that. You just can't if you're rational. So there's no Bible. There is nothing in human records that can help you. You have to figure it out by talking to the universe. And the universe talks back. That's miraculous. And that actually does prove the existence of superconsciousness, which is God. So if you start the right way, by only talking to the universe, no miracles, no divine fiat, no intervention from an old man in the sky, no books written by some man wearing a loincloth who is just guessing post facto, that violates a principle of rational logic. So you start with the universe. What does the universe say? Well, that's going to take you a long time. It took me, well, a typical amount of time all my life. It took decades. Did I have a rational approach? I can see looking back that there was a mix, and now I'm capable of looking at my contemporaries, the experts, the PhDs, the pundits, the giants, the ones that you have to believe because they have the power of the government behind them. So yes, you're from monkeys. You're from monkeys. And there's no creation event. And so there's no God. And they'll take it all the fucking way. Not necessarily, but that's the trend, is atheism. No God. That now it's an absolute division. Either science is right, and everything makes sense by not making sense at all, or you start with God. You can't do either one. Because in the first case, when you say that you're a scientist, and you say by saying that you're representing rational logic, that you're going to prove everything you say, well, you had better not lie, because you're putting yourself in the place of God. You're going to decide based on factual evidence, measurements, that men are definitely, without any question at all, we're from monkeys. We're from monkeys. What if you have direct scientific evidence that disproves your idea of monkey business? That was discovered. Can you credit what I just said? No. Because I could just have pulled that out of my ass. Oh, that's been disproved. We're not from monkeys. How do you know that? How could I say that? Well, I would have to show you the proof sequence, wouldn't I? Absolutely. What is the proof sequence that discredits the dominant model for biology? Really, for the origin of the ecology and then the origin of humans, which is the one we want. Bingo! Where do humans come from? That's the only question that needs to be answered. You have to get that. Nothing else matters. In chemistry, geology, astronomy, that's just supportive evidence to get the answer that is needed. What is the origin of the human race? Right? No. That's an incomplete question because you're not addressing the future. Okay, let's try to do that. The question that we have to answer, the only question, we're trying to get the question, you understand, for orientation. Otherwise, you have no goal. What are you trying to solve? You're trying to solve death. Death. The cessation of your consciousness, which is irrational. And you know it. But how do you prove that that's irrational? Because Richard Dawkins will have you for lunch. Richard Dawkins knows and will tell you point blank as the final authority on the subject, representing all of science, representing all of rational logic, the accumulated wisdom of all mankind. Richard Dawkins will tell you the answer. There is no God. There's no afterlife. There's no reality. There's no such thing as reality. That's his conclusion. Do you buy it? Because he's selling it and he's made millions. It's all for money because he's an entertainer. He's an actor, just like a politician. He's trying to snow you with a false sequence. So no, he's not right. He can't prove what he says at all. But nobody else can prove what they want to prove either, which is what? Probably the Bible. Thump, thump, thump. There it is. It's in that book. That's the axiomatic beginning. Whatever God says through a man's book. You can't do that. I'm saying so. I'm the guide now. I'm the imam. I'm the leader. And that's what you have to be. Well, look what it does to a man's personality. I've been doing nothing but raising my voice since I began this video. And in all my videos now, I get quite animated. Meaning I'm emotionally driven. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is an involution problem. You're trying to decide a question that is based entirely on yourself. It's for you. It's for me. I have to decide this. You have to decide this. My answer is not going to be your answer. But we do influence each other. We try to give each other our own wisdom. Here's what I found. I'm pretty sure I can prove, just speaking for anyone, scientist or imam or any religious leader or political leader or entertainer or PhD wise man, everybody has their opinion. And it's only an opinion, although they'll say, no, it is not an opinion. You had better trust what I say because I'm right. That's what everybody does. That's science. You have to do that. Well, that'll make you megalomaniac. That's a definition of megalomania. I'm right. That means that you're wrong unless you agree with me. That's science. That's exactly right. So that's what a scientist intends to be, is the one who has all the answers. The know-it-all. The prophet. The prophet of rational logic. Is that sent by God? No, it's not that kind of a prophet. It's a self-appointed prophet. That's a scientist. That's a true scientist, is a self-appointed prophet. And then he bases everything he says, if he's strictly going by the book of logic, the universe says what it is. That's science. What does the universe tell us about itself? Try including yourself in that equation, and now you're totally disoriented again. And there's no way to begin, there's no way to get your goal, there's no way to orient. All of which is to begin, after only 24 minutes of me raising my voice, what is it that I say? And can I prove it? Because without the proof, you cannot believe me. You're not going to believe me. The only reason that I'm involved at all is that I am the intermediary between you and the universe. I'm your telescope. I'm your bifocal lenses. To give a pretty strange metaphor, I'd have to confess. So what do I say? Well, what I say is that there is a way to orient, and you have to begin that way. Or you're not going to have the right framework for an answer. And it's teleological. So you're not trying to form a unary question. You're forming a dualistic question. Because when you're talking about origins, going back in time, what you're trying to do is teleologize. You're trying to get an answer for what's going to happen based on what happened in the past. And that has to be a closed loop. They have to define each other. That's called a dichotomy. Actually, it's a superpositional answer to a unary question. Your question is one question, namely, what happens after death? What is the meaning of death? The cessation of human consciousness. What happens after that? Something has to happen after that. Is it oblivion? No, because then Hitler gets away with murder. So it's moral. There's a moral element, and that goes to our emotional system. We cannot accept an immoral answer. Otherwise, men get away with murder. Injustice. You can't justify irrationality. So now you're stuck because the entire globe is just one festering mass of irrational behavior. Warfare. All the way back to the beginning of human records. Men kill each other. They don't just kill each other, they murder each other. They're bloodthirsty. They want each other to die instead of themselves. For what? For comfort? Well, that's pretty selfish. So every great man, from Henry David Thoreau to you have a whole list of great men, many of them alive today and speaking out, we have to have world peace. Well, they're barking up a tree. That's not going to happen. So you're stuck with an irrational situation that men are the problem. Humankind is the only irrational aspect to the whole universe. Everything else makes sense, except for humans. Humans don't make sense. We're irrational creatures. We have rational logic, and the great men all say, if you use your rational system correctly, we will all get along, and there won't be any more murder, and then we can go on from there and figure out what the hell we're doing here, but we have to stop killing each other first. That's not going to happen. Instead, it's a dead certainty, 100% certainty, that men are going to exterminate themselves. And it's going to happen very likely within the next 3 years. There won't be any more humans. And now you're stuck with total oblivion. So how do you rationalize that? Well, you can't. So there's no answer. There's no answer. And that's it. Well, I'm going to turn this off now. I'm just going to go to sleep, maybe take a whole bottle of sleeping pills so I don't have to worry about it anymore. I won't wake up, just like my friend the dog who died when I was 6 and I couldn't handle it. This is my solution to that problem. The solution to the problem of death is to give up and die, because you're never, ever going to figure this out. You're doomed. It's hopeless. Rational logic failed. It can't. That's the most irrational thing a man could say, is that rational logic is of no service to us. It can't solve the world's situation, so what? Let the world fuck itself. You still need the answer for yourself. Can you do that? Can you divorce yourself from the fate of mankind? According to Western science, no, you can't. But according to strict rational logic, you have to. You have to separate yourself from what your fellow men have been doing since the beginning of time, because they're wrong, but you have to be right. And now you're on your own. Well, that's a religious situation. You're now religiously oriented, because now you're going to have to find the answer that nobody else can find. And that's the story of my life. It's not just the story of my life, though. It's the story of Al-Ghazali's life, the greatest of all the Islam scholars. He has been called, and this is absolutely true, absolutely the right way to entitle this man. He is the proof of Islam. I did not make up that term. He proves that Islam is true. Islam is the right orientation. Well, what does Islam say? You would have to ask Al-Ghazali. No, you wouldn't. You can ask me. because I know everything Al-Ghazali knows to a certain threshold, which is the threshold we need. What was Al-Ghazali's orientation, based on which he wrote a 4-volume book, the most famous book ever written? You don't know that because you were born in the white supremacist West. But it's the Revival of Religious Science, which has a beautiful name in Arabic. Al-Ghazali was a spiritual polymath, and he was also probably the wisest man who's ever lived, with the possible exception of Shlomo, who is Solomon. I am the inheritor of what these men tried to address. What is the answer of the smartest person who's ever lived? Well, that was Al-Ghazali. There is no question about that. You're listening to me now, so you're going to go along with what I say. And if you can disprove what I say, which you won't, good luck. You always have the off button, but while you're listening to me, you're going to get the straight truth. And there is no contender. I got it. No one else has it. Megalomania. Does that sound megalomaniac? You can't avoid it. If you're going to be the best scientist of all time, which is the goal of every scientist, is to get the answers and share them so that everyone else can do the same proof sequence that you arrived at, and they can prove it to themselves, and you don't need the pundit. You don't need the imam, because he showed you what the universe says, what the universe teaches us, not God, the universe. What's the difference? Ultimately, the difference between the universe as our teacher, which is physics, okay? That's what physics is. It's interrogating the physical universe to hear what she says. What does she say about herself? Quite an interesting question, but that is the nature of the question. And now it's no longer involute. You're not including yourself. Ultimately you are, or you're not orienting correctly. But you have to have the framework in which you can inject yourself. And that means your place in the universe. Where do you fit into the universe? Right now. Meaning in the future. Where are you going in the universe that will verify your absolute existence? Because unless your consciousness continues after physical death, there is no universe. And that is the result, and Richard Dawkins would be right. Because there's no future for you. You don't fit in the universe. You're not even here now. That doesn't make sense. You are here now. So that's the nature of the involution question. The involute situation where you're trying to orient, but you're split. You're split into a moral creature because you know there can't be murder. How do we know that? It's because of love. Love, oh yes. Well, love is something that you did not invent. You could say that you discovered it. As you awoke out of complete unconsciousness, you became aware of a very powerful influence on your existence. And you finally come to realize it's love. Now, you can't say the universe created you because then you're assigning consciousness to the universe. How can you say the universe is conscious? Well, that is essentially what Bernardo Kastrup has come up with to give an alternate framework for physics, where he asserts, quite well, if you're orienting according to particle physics, that is, there are little building blocks to the universe, and that's how you have to address the universe, that's called materialism. There's a lot of fancy words for that. But Bernardo says you have oriented incorrectly. So what's his framework? Consciousness. Because you have consciousness, being conscious, that's called an infinitive, a progressive infinitive. You are being conscious. That is your being. It's not as a mass of electrons, protons, neutrons, and whatever else. It's as a conscious entity. That's what you are. You are not material. You're consciousness. And he inverts the whole system so that you define material in terms of consciousness, not the other way around. In Western science, it is considered that consciousness is exuded like some strange ichor or gas from your brain cells. And Bernardo finally blew the whistle on that. You have got it ass backwards. The reason that you think that there are particles, not so much waves though, we're coming to that. Instead of thinking that you're a mass of atoms and molecules and neurons that generate consciousness, he says that's flat out wrong. Instead, what's happening is that the universe has generated consciousness out of itself. Does that mean that the universe is conscious? Bernardo is so sensitive to that question because that's really the dividing line right at the outset where all the eyeballs are staring at you, Bernardo. Are you asserting pantheism? That's pantheistic. You're saying the universe is God because you're saying the universe is conscious. That's not quite correct. But Bernardo cannot address that in the way he would like, and he's still frustrated. And that man is prolific. He's out on the internet. He's still writing books. He's a dynamo. He's got it almost right, but he knows it's still almost. He has no application for his framework. He's trying, but he's trying in the realm of basically parapsychic behavior. And he's just hitting a wall everywhere he turns. He can't get out of his labyrinth. So he's just equally stymied as everybody else. But he knows he's right. I can prove that he's right. You are correct, Bernardo. But here's what you're missing in your inability to address the accusation of pantheism. Bernardo takes a very, very strict scientific posture. And that's to his credit. You would want to do that insofar as you're capable of maintaining a purely rational scientific basis. He's trying to exclude God. He can't make the final and put it together because he's still not thinking clearly. And I can prove where he's missing the point. He's so close. His name for his framework is Analytic Idealism. Analytic idealism. It has to be synthetic idealism. Synthetic means you put it together, you're not pulling it apart. He has to maintain, he has to maintain distance between what he's essentially proving the existence of. He's essentially found the right framework that proves the existence of superconsciousness. And his whole framework is superconsciousness. But he refuses to call that an entity. He just can't bring himself to do that because he knows that according to his analytic approach, that means pantheism, which he's accused of constantly because his framework is indistinguishable from pantheism, which means what? That the universe is God. What's the flaw in that? Okay, consciousness, what is that? We only know of it as a human concept, that we consider ourselves to be conscious. What he is actually saying is that our consciousness, our human consciousness, is derived from superconsciousness. Now, so far, that is what he says. Doesn't that mean that the universe is God? No, it doesn't. That would be pantheism. So is the universe conscious? No. In the analytic idealistic framework, because it's analytic, the universe is conscious. And that's incorrect. No, it's not. It's mechanical. So where is consciousness then? Where from is human consciousness derived if it's not from the universe? It's from the entity that is in the universe. But it can't be in the universe. That's the contradiction that nobody can solve, not even Bernardo. I solved it with strict physics, because I can prove that there is a perpendicular space in space. It's superpositional. The universe that we can measure is only one aspect of the actual universe. The other aspect is bound to these two concepts here: cyclic physics and the implicate order. Cyclic physics is probably the easier of the two terms to define because I defined it. The universe is not linear. It's based not on the straight line. It's non-Euclidean. But when you say that, you're adding a dimension to space, which is this: the closed line, the circle. That is the only true line because it involves motion. There's no such thing as a circle or a sphere without motion. A straight line does not imply motion. It implies distance. And I've proved that so rigorously in my 1,000 videos that was the basis of my breakthrough into a new geometry, the geometry of physical space, which is what Einstein was trying to get. Now, the cyclic physics is the incorporation of motion, that is dynamics, into the physical universe. Everything is moving, and nothing is moving on a straight line. That's an illusion. And straight line distance is also an illusion. Everything is curved. Everything is closed. There are no open-ended lines. There's no such thing as infinity. You can conceive it in linear logic, and I've done so and proved that the concept of infinity is a derivative of reality, in which there is no infinity. The universe is finite on closure. That's redundant. The universe is spherical and it is closed. But there are two imaginary infinities that bind it and bound it. One of them is physical out and the other one is physical in. And I have the mathematical formula that closes the universe, eliminating the concept of the Big Bang, eliminating the concept of cosmological expansion, which I have disproved. The universe is not expanding. It's rotating in hyperspheric space. And that's the outer aspect of cyclic physics. At the inner edge, the quantum of closure is twofold. The quantum of physical closure is the proton. That's the quantum of centripetal force. The other, which balances the entire universe with centrifugal force, is electromagnetic radiation pressure. Where does it get its pressure from? From velocity, correct? That light has a velocity? That's imaginary. A photon has no velocity. What it has is a particulate presence in hyperspace, so that when a photon falls, it falls to the edge of the universe, and it falls at a certain rate, which is a two-component number. It's a rate. So the photon has distance over time as its velocity component. Distance over time is velocity. That's the velocity of the universe rotating. So the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, or 300,000 kilometers per second, is the rotation rate of the hyperspheric universe. Within that, you find Bohm's implicate order. The only man ever to derive a rational conclusion from quantum mechanics was David Bohm. And his formulation of that is very closely related to synthetic idealism. That is that the universe x-folds. It goes from in to out. When it goes from out to in, that is the integral of protonic centripetal force, that the universe has a specific gravity because it's made of protons. But that's monopolar, and that violates Emmy Noether's symmetry principle of the conservation of energy. So when you say that there's a monopolar gravity component, you're saying half of the truth because it's sucking everything in to quadrillions of black holes. So space is being sucked in by the protons. It's not actually sucking in space, it's establishing a force based on its presence in space, that creates a sink in space. And that's why the electrons gather around the proton core, because the electrons manifest centrifugal force. They're always trying to fall to the edge of the universe. That's energy falling to the edge in proportion as space appears to be dragged to a center. And that composes the center and the edge of the physical universe, based on a two-force balance system that Ruja Josip Bošković discovered. And that's all I have energy for. The sun is about to start coming up here on this beautiful Saturday morning, in the 18th of July. Happy birthday, Ridgely Schneider, one of the greatest men I've ever had the pleasure to have known. I wish I could attend your birthday, but I don't have a car. And that's my shout out to one of the greatest men I've ever had the pleasure to meet. Happy birthday, Ridgely, and happy day to all of you. Remember, you're conscious, but pretty soon you're going to die. Have you solved that problem? I'll show you how to solve it so that you'll know where you're going. All right. Thank you. Keep looking up. We'll be right back with more of Bohm's implicate order and everything else I was talking about. And we'll get to this one, probably the most interesting of them all, Revelation. That's the title of a book, but I leave it ambiguous here what I mean by revelation. All right. Thank you again for tuning in. We'll be right back. Thank you.